Yeah, I know.
Well, they can if you take them on.
Yeah, right. This is an unusual start to our special meeting, which should be at 5 o'clock. Because of the weather, we've got a couple of people a few minutes late. So what I'd like to do is say that the meeting is open, but take a short pause so that we don't interrupt the senator when he's talking. And if people aren't here in a couple of minutes, we'll go ahead anyway. So I'm muting this now.
Okay, now it's green. Okay. Hi, Julie.
After the slightly late start, I welcome and thank Senator Hawkins for giving the board his time and joining us for this slightly less than an hour now of listening and learning. Senator Hawkins is the ranking member of the Senate's Early Learning and K-12 Education Committee. As a former school board member and former North Central Educational Services District board member, he is no outsider to the paramount importance of public education. Senator, we'd like you to have the floor for the first half of the meeting and be able to share information and insights with the board. In the second half, we would like board members in turn to have the opportunity to ask you questions or bring their priority topics to your attention. For us board members, I will want to make sure that time in the second half is well distributed between topics and board members and that we finish on time for the regular meeting. So I may have to ask to limit a topic to give space for another. With that introduction, welcome, Senator Hawkins. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thanks for having me. Good to see you, Julie. I know the traffic was crazy. I was telling Bill and Martin that I think it was the longest trip from East Wenatchee to Wenatchee that I've ever made in my life. But happy to be here. Thank you so much for the introduction and having me. I'm Brad Hawkins, our state senator. I put together a PowerPoint presentation to show you. If you're able to pull that up, I can just kind of go through that. But what I thought I'd do is tell you a little bit about myself and do kind of a legislative preview and set the table, and then we can talk about various issues of interest. No, I saw it up there, so I know it's in the background. Okay, there we are. Go ahead and next slide, please. Oh, they're not. Okay. Oh, do I? Okay, great. Okay, I'm gonna go back one slide. Perfect. So I thought what I'd do is I'd give you a little bit of background about me because I know some of you, but some of you I may not know as well. But I actually had my entire K through 12 education right here in Wenatchee School District. So Washington Elementary, Orchard Middle School, Wenatchee High School. Bill was actually an assistant wrestling coach when I wrestled for Wenatchee. So it's great to be here. And like you, I've served on a school board as well. I served 10 years on 2 different school boards before being elected to the legislature. So I served briefly for 2 or 3 years on the ESD board here. And then I left that position to volunteer for Eastmont. If you remember, Eastmont had a major financial crisis many years ago, and we had an interim superintendent ourselves, and I stepped into that position to help Eastmont. And we eventually passed our school bond at 60%, and I sort of fulfilled my time on the Eastmont school board. But I learned a lot, and serving on a school board is a tremendous service to the community. So thank you for what you do. I have a family of 4. My wife, Shawn, and I have been married for 20 years, and I have 2 teenage boys, Luke and Tyler. Luke is a 9th grader and Tyler is 7th grade. And they both go to Sterling Junior High at Eastmont. So I served in the House of Representatives after being fulfilling my school board duties. And I was elected in 2012 and then to the Senate in 2016. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about the 12th district, because much like you're going through potentially a process with your school director areas, we have adjusted our district, and it's really a product of the Bipartisan Redistricting Commission, where they basically take all 49 different legislative districts and they balance it based on population every 10 years. And we had a lot of population reporting in Western Washington, but not as much in Central and Eastern Washington. So what happened is the legislative districts in Eastern Washington needed to grow geographically to pick up size, and it had the effect of nudging some districts over a bit. And the 12th got nudged over a bit into Snohomish County and North Bend Carnation in King County. This is, I'll let you read this kind of on your own, but this is sort of my philosophy of public service, about being responsible for tax dollars, serving constituents, staying open-minded about issues, being respectful of people's differences, and putting public service before politics. It's something I've predicated my whole service on. I think it works well for me and our district. I have a history of some bipartisan legislative issues. Not all my bills actually pass. I think it's only 10% of the bills that get introduced every session actually get signed into law by the governor. I think my rate is about 500. So I think I'm batting 500, but still that's half of my bills don't make it. And some of the bills that I introduce, they're all bipartisan, but some of the bills I introduce are kind of drive a discussion and encourage legislators to think differently. And maybe you've heard about some of those where it comes to voluntary school district consolidation or encouraging school districts to look at a slightly different school calendar and things like that. But these are the bills that have passed since I've been into the Senate. And some of them are related to our wildfire work or working with different cities. Renewable hydrogen was something I worked pretty closely with Douglas County PUD on, and wildfire prevention. Last year was the first year I sponsored an affordable housing bill targeted towards workforce housing, where some communities like Leavenworth and Chelan are sort of gradually losing their sense of community because their workforce can't afford to live in the communities they serve. And so I partnered with Chelan County and the Leavenworth mayor on that bill. Unfortunately, it did pass. Hopefully you get a chance to come to Olympia this session, but if you don't, this is what it looks like on a really nice day. I haven't actually been, we haven't actually worked in the Capitol a lot in the last couple of years because of the COVID restrictions, but this year we're going back in person, which I'm really excited about. And so you often see these pictures of what the Capitol looks like. There's always a lot of people hustling, bustling on a good day, but that's from behind the Capitol. And then this is from inside the Capitol. That is the legislative rotunda, and it's usually full of people. This is kind of what it looked like during the COVID pandemic when we were working remotely. But it'll be great to be back there. And we do tours and we have legislative pages. And so if you have an interest in that, we'd be happy to support you. Just to kind of tell you a little bit about the legislative makeup too. The legislative branch of government is really the House and the Senate combined. The governor is the executive branch, but any piece of legislation or any budget needs to be approved in its identical form, House and Senate, and be signed by the governor in order to become law. But we have 98 members of the State House of Representatives and 49 senators. So when you go back to that map of the state of Washington with all the different size puzzle pieces, there's 49 districts, and there's one senator and 2 House members for each district. And each chamber of the legislature has various different policy committees. I serve on the Early Learning and K-12 Education Committee. In the House, it's known as just the Education Committee because the early learning piece is actually a jurisdiction of another committee. So the House and Senate have slightly different committees just based on the policy areas, but all the bills start in those committees, as you probably know, and they have to receive hearings and kind of get approved by their committees before they can advance in the process. And bills, there's a lot of ways for bills not to make it. So the whole system is sort of designed for bills not to make it out of their committee, or not to even get a hearing, or not to get a vote after the hearing. And then all these sort of different steps along the way to go before the full Senate. And even if a bill passes the full Senate, then it needs to go to the House of Representatives and go through the same process, go to the House Education Committee and get approved by the House Budget Committee and then in the end, the governor needs to sign it. And if he doesn't, he vetoes it. So sometimes people say the legislature should pass X, Y, and Z, but even if the legislature could, the governor would still need to agree upon it. So he has a very powerful position, as you can imagine. We have 3 budgets in the state. So often you hear about the state budget, but the reality is we have 3. We have the operating budget, which funds the day-to-day services of state government. Primarily, a lot of the K-12 education comes out of the operating budget. Transportation budget, which funds the transportation agencies like Department of Licensing and the State Patrol and the DOT, but it also funds transportation improvement projects and maintenance and preservation projects all across the state. And then we have the capital budget, which funds infrastructure in the state, and that is the budget that funds the school construction assistance account program, which is the matching program that we use for to match school districts that pass their bonds and things. But the operating budget is about $64 billion. The transportation budget is about 12, and the capital budget fluctuates, but last year I think it was 7.8 billion. So, and these are 2-year budgets as well. So the budget cycle, as you can see on the bottom there, when we meet in Olympia this January, we'll be developing and debating the budgets that will begin July 1 of 2023 and go through June 30th of 2025. That's what's known as our legislative biennium or 2-year period. And so hopefully we wrap up by May, but sometimes it's pushed all the way towards that July 1 date. And I know a lot of folks kind of get pretty nervous. But like I mentioned, all 3 of the budgets, as well as every individual bill that becomes law, needs to pass in its exact same form all the way through the process. So it's a very rigorous, sort of cumbersome process by design. And if one word is different in the bill in the 2 chambers, then it needs to be reconciled. These are the amounts, as I mentioned. I got those right, fortunately, for the 3 budgets. And like I said, the next biennium or 2-year period is coming up. I think you budget annually, at the school district, right? Yeah. So this is a look into the operating budget, the $64 billion 2 years of expenditures. This is for the current biennial budget that we're now in, the 2021 to 2023 budget. This budget expires June 30th of 2023. So that's where that other budget picks up on July 1. It used to be that education spending was almost half of the state budget, although I wouldn't say that the education spending has decreased at all. But what has happened over time with the extra state revenues is that the other areas of the budget have also increased or been added. So that sort of tends to shrink on a percentage basis, the amount invested into K-12, but the $27.8 billion figure is actually increasing and has increased significantly since the 2012 State Supreme Court McCleary decision, which you probably know a lot about. But in addition to the K-12 expenditures, we also have a lot of early learning and higher ed. So when you think of the whole sort of K-20 system or early learning through K-20, it's definitely a majority of our budget, but we have the other expenditures, as you can see there as well. But the state budget has grown significantly, and this is something that I just wanted to make everybody aware of. When I started in the legislature, it was only $33.9 billion. But it has grown considerably. It has nearly doubled in 10 years. Now, I should say there are obviously a lot of inflationary factors. The state of Washington population has also grown. So, but the $64 billion budget now has far outpaced inflation and population index. And I've voted against this most recent budget too, and some of these others, but we have had extra revenues too. And I would rather see us save some more of those and kind of build up our maybe surplus or ending fund balance. I actually think school districts, if you have, I don't know what Wenatchee's at, maybe between 4% and 6%, maybe more than that, but it's probably slightly better than the state of Washington. So sometimes we hear from school districts that say, well, we're really struggling. We're running a really thin margin. I was like, so are we, and we spend to the max. It seems like every 2 years. It makes me pretty nervous because most of the revenues that support the state budget are sales tax and business and occupation tax. And so what tends to happen is when the revenues decline in economic downtimes, which we could be facing, we have a lot less revenue at the state to invest. But having said that, there have been a lot of significant investments in K-12 education, in early learning and in childcare, in a variety of other health and human services and corrections and other infrastructure things. So it's with any budget, there's always things to like and things not to like. I did want to share this figure with you. Now, this is a statewide per student average of cost per year. I'm sure most of the school districts, at least the larger ones in this area, are below this figure. Some of the smaller school districts are actually greater on a per student basis than this because they can't really spread their administrative costs and front office functions over more students. But I know Wenatchee is less than this, but I did want to point out how much the K-12 funding has increased. This isn't just state funding, though. I should point out this is also factoring local levy dollars. So as you know, school districts are not extensions of the state. You are your own local government, much like a city and county. You get funding from the state apportionment, you get your local levy funding, you get some federal dollars, maybe you have some fees sprinkled in. But in terms of state and local funding, you can see the significant increased investments that the state has tried to make in education, whether, and coincidentally, this is sort of post McCleary. state Supreme Court. So a lot of those extra enhancements were made to try to resolve the McCleary challenges, but also we tried to cap the levies. That lasted a bit if the levies have increased. And I just think it's important to kind of recognize sort of what's happening, I believe, with education is that even though the state is able to fund education significantly more, I think the public has growing expectations of what the school system will provide. It used to be that academic function was sort of the main purpose of schools, but now, as you probably observed, there's a nutritional component, a childcare component. Some school districts, I think like Wenatchee, are somewhat involved. They're partnering with healthcare delivery. And so there's just social, emotional supports and things. There's a lot of needs in society. And I think a lot of those are being transferred into our school districts, which, I'm not necessarily passing a judgment on that, but I just want us to recognize what's happening. So even though we are taxpayers making more investments in K-12 education and voters locally are improving increased levies every few years, a lot of the feedback you hear from maybe some of your colleagues, well, it's not enough. We have it's just, and I think the more we transfer more and more responsibilities into the school district as society, then the more we kind of have to realize it's never going to be enough. But what is basic education is really going to be debated, and the funding formula and is what that needs to be modernized is going to be a big consideration. Looking ahead to the session here real quickly, we have a 105-day session. So we alternate between longer sessions and shorter sessions. Even though the legislators meet every year in January, if we're doing the development of the budgets, it's a longer 105-day session. But when we are in between those budgets, like next in 2024, then it's just a 60-day session. So it happens really quickly. The majorities are essentially the same as prior. So I think you're going to see a lot of the continuation of some of the policy priorities from some of those members. I do sense that there are more fiscal pressures with the budget this time around, just with so much uncertainty at the national level with economy and inflation and gas prices, and just what that may or may not do to the projected revenues that we're anticipating in the state over the next 2, 4, 6 years. I'm hoping for bipartisanship. That's kind of the space I like to operate in. It's kind of the space I have to operate in too, because with those numbers, as you see, there are in the House 58 Republicans to 40, or 58 Democratic members to 40 Republicans, 29 Democratic members in the Senate to 20 Republicans. We need to be able to work together to get things important to our district accomplished. But there is uncertainty about the bipartisanship because the numbers as such, most of the bills are just a simple majority to pass through the process. And as you can see, there doesn't have to be a lot of give and take and negotiated compromise with those figures. So it's a little bit of a concern. And one of the trends that does concern me for school districts, because I'm a former board member and I appreciate the important work you do, is I see less local control for our 295 school districts statewide. So one of the trends that I've observed over the last 4 years, whether it's comprehensive sex education or some of the equity and inclusion efforts, and regardless of how you feel about those things, I feel that those decisions are best made right here in the school board room by locally elected school board members. And what we've seen out of Olympia recently, frankly, is legislators saying, we know school board members are elected by their communities, but we are going to pass these policies to force you to adopt this. And we're going to pass a bill to force you to implement this. And to me, that represents a significant erosion of local control and doesn't empower the local school districts and the communities to do the important work that you're trusted with. So that is a concern of mine. And this is, as I wrap up the presentation, if you are interested, my website is senatorbradhawkins.org. I have my contacts here. I'm just one phone call or email away if you have any questions at all, and happy to answer questions tonight. But hope if you make a trip over for the School Directors Association, I hope you'll come visit us. I should say I'm in a temporary, speaking of portables, every school deals with portables. Our office is being demolished and remodeled. It's 100 years old, the building that my office is in. So maybe we can meet on the Senate floor. I'll take you there if you come over, rather than the portable office that is well beyond the Capitol building. But that's where I'll be. But if it can save you a trip, feel free to schedule a Zoom meeting or something with me too. We're happy to do that. So whatever works best for you. And thanks again for having me. I'm a proud graduate of Wenatchee High School, and Wenatchee School District has been a big part of who I am. And even though my kids go to Eastmont and I was on the Eastmont board, I love Wenatchee School District very much. So thanks for what you do.
Thank you very much, Senator Hawkins. That was comprehensive and thoughtful, and we really appreciate it. You did say that if any of the board members wanted to ask you questions about the information you've just provided, I'm opening it up to that purpose. No, I see no silence. No, you're going to go then. Okay.
Ready? Can you speak a little bit more? I feel as you do about local control. And that was actually one of my two questions, but how can we change that? Is there any hope for getting back more of our local control? How can you just expand on that a little bit and your thoughts on it and what we do about that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's been a challenging effort. And some of my legislative colleagues have great intentions, and that's not the issue. That whether their intentions or whatever policies that they're trying to mandate, that's really not my issue. I just don't believe that Olympia is the venue to debate many of those things, that we should be empowering our school board members who are elected by local communities. So how do you change it? I think you have to be vocal. And one of the concerns I have, just speaking very frankly, is your School Directors Association. I believe that the Washington State School Directors Association is disproportionately represented by Puget Sound based school districts. I mean, they may have, their annual meeting in Spokane or a regional meeting or whatever, but it seems like a lot of the policy direction is driven out of Olympia, which you get influences there from school board members. The issues are sometimes very different. And so I think you have to have those difficult conversations with your own School Directors Association. And I've had that, I told them, they're actually one of the only statewide associations that I know of where your dues are mandatory. You are required to participate in WASDA, whether they represent you or not. But whether it's the PUD Association or the Association of Washington Cities, if the cities don't want to participate in the association because you don't like the advocacy, you can step back. So I just think, not trying to totally throw them under the bus, but I do think they're there to represent you. And you need to make sure that they are trying their best to represent all districts in the state. And the main issue should be preserving local control. If that's your concern, I think that is what you should take to them. Hopefully as a board, you take that to them too. And in instances where they have not, they need to be held accountable. So when there's a bill that comes before the legislature that strips the local control and makes the decision in Olympia, if WASDA is supporting that, that should be a problem, I would think. Or if there's a major piece of legislation that totally undermines the local influence of the school board and takes that decision away from you, and WASD is neutral on the bill, because you can sign in for, pro, against, or neutral. They ask, why are you not against this bill? So I think being vocal and within your association is super important. And holding your legislators accountable too. Yeah. Hopefully that answers your question. And I think also, as you approve these policies, and you probably have these conversations, but it's like, why do you have to approve it if it's mandatory? You know, why do they force you to vote on it? What if you didn't approve it? You know, it's like, well, you have to. Well, then why even send it to us? So you kind of have to ask yourselves, like, these school board members are super well qualified. They're working really hard. They understand their district really well. You know, don't relegate them to just passing dress code policies or something. You need to let them, you know, do their budgeting and work on their policies and all these things that the communities all across the state entrust their school board members to do. And I feel the same way about cities and counties. So it's no different, really, even though I'm a former school board member, it's no different, but it's tough to see how much has changed, honestly, since I served.
Okay, thank you. Julie or Maria, do you have a question now? Otherwise, we can go on to our round robin unless you want to ask something else.
I have
Mhm.
questions regarding, I guess, specific legislation. I don't know if this is the appropriate time or,
I just spread it around. It's appropriate.
okay. So I noticed the simple majority bond passage is kind of I feel like a big piece of legislation that went pretty far last year. Do you get a sense, is that coming back up this year? And if so, what are things we can do to help maybe get that more traction so that it might go through?
Oh, I see. So you're in favor of it?
I think we
Or
in
you-
this
you
area sort of need to be.
Yeah. So the way I like to describe it, as you probably know, is levies are for learning and bonds are for buildings. And so levies are a short-term taxation. They're both voter approved. Bonds require that 60%. Many years ago, I want to say about 20 years ago, there was a lower threshold for the levies. But the bond amount is still a 60% threshold. The bills that have been advanced prior have gone pretty far, but I think that requires a change in the state constitution. So it's a higher threshold to pass. So I think that bill, if I remember right, is not a simple majority of the legislature and the governor. It's actually some sort of 2/3 or super majority, because it would, I think it's an adjustment to the Constitution, and then it has to go to the voters for approval. I don't support it. So I know Wenatchee really needs its bonds to pass, as do a lot of communities. But the difference I see between the bonds and the levies is the levies is that short-term tax, whereas bonds encumber residents with their property taxes over decades. And so I think there should be some sort of higher threshold. Now, whether that's 60%, I guess that could be debated. There have been some bills at 55%, but I think it's a really important question. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time and also tell you in forthright where I stand. I think a lot of the school districts that are unable to pass their school bonds at 60% cite that as the reason. But the reality is, if you look back, there's a lot of other factors associated with it. Maybe the timing wasn't right. Maybe they didn't have all their facts clear. Maybe they were asking for too much, but what I can tell you is other than Cascade School District, the last bond that was approved was one that I was involved in. And we passed that Eastmont bond on the first try in a recession, because it was like 2010, on a November general election ballot, where a lot of the school districts run them for special elections. They have to pay more, but they're going to get their votes out and stuff. we put it all up front. But there are some ways I think the state can incentivize communities to do more too, because we have this school construction assistance program in the capital budget, which I mentioned, that is a matching fund for school districts that communities do pass their bonds. But I think we can do more to provide perhaps more of a match and more of an incentive if the communities were to approve it. But having said that, I do know that property taxes is what I hear most about when it comes to taxes, even though the state portion of the property tax is really small. Well, not really small, as I think it's about 25%. Most of the property taxes are school levies, school bonds, fire districts, port, local, city, county property taxes. I think we have a library district and other things. So when you look at the whole pie, the state portion of property taxes only a slice, but that's what we hear most about. And it's because with that and the increased valuations, people are feeling taxed out of their homes, and it's a tough situation, especially for seniors.
First of all, I want to say thank you for your bipartisanship and, working together and trying to get things accomplished. Thank you for that. And I don't know if you have an answer for this. I don't expect you to, but you mentioned, the funding per student has increased significantly in the last 10 years. And we know we're at a different place now than we were 10 years ago. But how does a district support student needs? If we know that a student can't learn if they're hungry, if they can't learn if they're not in, accurate mental health, housing insecurities, and all those are factors, inflation, housing issues, COVID. So what approach do we take as a school district to see the child as a whole and their well-being? Because we know there's so many different factors. And we also know that these students don't come from traditional households. These are students of color, our low socioeconomic status students. So, where's that magic response? Because again, we're in a different world than we were 10 years ago.
That's exactly right. And that is an excellent question. And I think that is what the legislature is wrestling with as we're contemplating modernizing the school funding formula. So as you know, we have an apportionment formula where per full-time equivalent student, we push out a certain amount of dollars, and we rolled in some social emotional supports just recently, but I think we need to take a look at how we're going to modernize that. But to your question, I think we need to be aware of what's happening. And I think you all do as school board members, but the general public, it's like and I feel as a legislator, like we keep funding more and more, but the goalposts kind of keep moving back. And part of that is because I think, generally speaking, all across the state, public has a lot of trust and confidence in their school districts. And when it comes to certain services outside of perhaps the core academic services, people entrust their kids with their school district. And so that's why you've seen, for example, the student care. Student care is available year round, even if it's maybe here, I'm not sure, after school till 5 o'clock or year round. And there's a lot of need in society. But I think it is becoming increasingly more challenging to differentiate where a school district's responsibilities end and a family and community's responsibilities begin. And as I've observed this as a legislator over 10 years now, it's a bit dangerous territory to be in. I think as school districts, you're wrestling with that too, is what's the role of family and what's the role of the community here? And I believe the more, generally speaking, the more the school district takes on, and it may not be taking on, it could be the more the public expects of their school district to deliver, perhaps the fewer, and I'm just speaking just anecdotally, but maybe there's fewer wraparound services provided within the communities. So to your question, I think you probably need to continue doing what you're doing to make sure you're meeting the needs of every student in your district. Absolutely. But you also have a responsibility to engage with the community to make sure the community is still stepping up with their wraparound services and not just pushing it all onto Wenatchee School District. You know, it's not right. And when it comes to after COVID, my child was in that situation. My 7th grader really struggled with the isolation. The only thing that bounced him back over time was interacting with his peers again and playing sports. But as a parent, there was so much need, and the counselors, just weren't enough counselors in this community, and it's a tough situation. But now after COVID, I think there's even more expectations onto the school district to meet these needs. And I think school districts are able to do some things, but service providers in the community should do that as well. But it's tough to, it's tough, you know. For example, I think there's been more challenges on childcare all across the state. And so as those challenges increase, there's more expectations on school districts to provide student care. But then as more school districts provide student care, perhaps there's less of a motivation or willingness, but some of the providers to step into that space, right? So it's a challenge. But I do think when that time comes, we need to have those good, healthy, rigorous discussions about how to modernize the state funding formula. But that's a tough situation too. I do support the local control with school districts, but sometimes people say, well, the state funding formula doesn't match what our cost of service is. But even if we were able to sort of wave a magic wand and have the resources to align those two things, because you do collective bargaining at the local level, and that's the case with every school district, if you're able to negotiate something higher because that's what the market demands are, and you need that to recruit and retain your awesome teachers in Wenatchee, which I know some of them and I've had some of them, but then you're always going to be sort of, your costs are always going to be outpacing whatever the state funding formula is. So there's no sort of magic solution, but I think a lot of good communication is important. And your questions and the moral dilemma it puts you in as a school board member is tough, because you're right. Those students can't learn if they're hungry, you know, they can't do their homework if they are not in a safe environment. Now with all the broadband connections and all the technology, they probably are at disadvantaged compared to other students if they don't have equal access to those things. Yeah.
Thank you. I want to thank you, Senator Hawkins, for being an elected legislator who takes the trouble to ask questions, and many good questions. And I want to use my time to continue in a public forum, a topic that we brought to you during your listening tour. The idea of making some change from our traditional school year to a modified or balanced calendar that could be substantially more efficient for learning. And I'm going to repeat, more efficient for learning, which I think you've addressed. I asked you, as our senator, what you could do to help. You rightly put the monkey right back on my back by saying that you were a sponsor of Senate Bill 5147, and that the OSPI has a grant program for schools to implement pilot programs. Local responsibility means it's our job to talk to our district community about how all of the interested parties that are involved could address what is both a problem and an opportunity. I'm going to grandstand a little bit because I think we need to put a bit of nonpartisan heat on all of us. We share a common interest and duty to give our best efforts to promote the interests of education, which means taking advantage of opportunities to improve, just like this one. And I'm just going to hit three things with a hammer. The Constitution gives us the paramount duty of the state and its budgeting for public schools. Funding matters. Then I'm going to use being a development economist a lot on the school board. The economic and social well-being of your senatorial district politically is vital in the long term and the short term. And the well-being is achieved when our skills and our people resources are competitive. This world and this state is competitive. And raising kids as investment is another way of putting it. I actually wrote down quality pre-K to 12 plus education is necessary human investment. And I think in our government, this is just personal, there's somewhat of a bias against youth. Youth doesn't vote, youth sometimes gets the short end of the stick. So getting back to the traditional school calendar, there's a lot of evidence that it's suboptimal. And I'm not going to go into too many details because I want to comment at the end and we're maybe short of time too. In industrial language, we do a lot of rework. In educational language, we reteach after every summer. And that's only a part of it. There, I believe, and I'm learning, there are a number of other calendar factors that can be modified to improve learning. And thank you, instigated a discussion on this issue. Last week at the Washington State School Directors Association conference in Spokane, I learned about a handful of modified calendar initiatives in Washington State. And they did things differently from what I'd imagined, which was good. Diverse ideas, creative solutions. And what was important was how the school districts went about designing and implementing their changes. It took, and I'm going to hit generics, it took open-mindedness, it took patience to weigh the impacts on everybody who's involved and whose consent was needed, both of those. That included neighboring districts, not just inside your own school district, extracurricular activities, employment contracts, family vacations, and work schedules. It's a big package. And the two districts that I looked at were fairly small, and so they had an easier communication effort. Explain and explain more was part of the lesson that was given. They described a pattern that started with people being very cautious. It's kind of a frightening thing, and seemed to end with acceptance and even enthusiasm once people got into it and saw the benefits. One size does not fit all. You've addressed that in Olympia versus the districts. But the reduction in rework or reteach seems to be well validated. That's the big low line hanging fruit, but there are a lot of others. Budget resources, people and money matter, but it looked like it was manageable at first glance. So I've talked a lot, and my individual board director, and this is me flying a kite,
Majority of
today is to start a serious Wenatchee conversation if anybody else wants to pick it up. You have a political interest in successful change and improvement in your senatorial district. Can you add comments to what you've pointed out before? And better still, if you're able to offer encouragement for people working for a constructive consensus change, we'd love it.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you. So just a little bit of walk down memory lane. I did introduce a bill a couple sessions ago to encourage school districts to sort of think differently about the traditional school calendar. It's a largely agrarian-based sort of thing that now has become so commonplace it largely goes unquestioned. But why students would want to take off 2.5 months or whatever in the summer, almost 3 months in some school districts, and all the reteaching, the starting and the stopping and then the restarting again, and then spending September reteaching what went on in May and June, it just seems very inefficient. And back to those charts I was showing you about those are state taxpayer investments in our education system. And in my mind, we should be always thinking of what is the most effective way? What is the most efficient way? If we were to redesign the system anew today, what would we do? Maybe it wouldn't be a K-12 system. Maybe it'd be early learning, maybe it'd go through 10th grade. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that people wouldn't design the school calendar for all these 295 districts the way most school districts have it today. So my idea in the legislation was the state funds 180 school days. It's part of your mix. I'd actually like the state to fund 200 school days, honestly. But every day is so many millions and millions of dollars when you consider about half the state budget. So my idea was, well, no problem. Let's make it voluntary, but we can incentivize school districts to spread out those 180 days over a longer period. So maybe instead of 9 months, they spread it out over 10 months. Maybe they're still, I'm not anti-summer break. I'm very pro summer break, but I'm just not sure it needs to be so long. And what we've seen with COVID, especially for marginalized students of color, is that they're disadvantaged. You know, they are significantly disadvantaged. And those are, as you know, a huge portion of students in your school district. They don't have the same supports when they're home for summer break as my kids do with their piano lessons and tutoring if they need it and some of those things. So I think we need to think differently. And I've challenged the school districts to think about this. I've tried to provide incentives. My bill got pretty far. And there are different ways. Maybe you go to 4 days a week, right? But you still have 180 days, but that's getting you out there a little bit. And honestly, I think, I mean, obviously there's a lot of important conversations with your collective bargaining units, but I think even for them, even for the staff, it seems like we're squishing everything into, and there's no time to breathe. It seems like, so I think there's advantages for a lot of folks and with student care and some of those things. So maybe rather than taking one big long break, there could be a few shorter breaks. Someone suggested sort of like the college trimester system with a few weeks off in between or something like that. And when the kids come back, I don't think they would have forgotten so much, and we wouldn't have to restart the whole thing again. And I think it would be more efficient for taxpayer dollars. And I think taxpayers would get more of a return on the investment. I don't mind investing more of our tax dollars in education. I support that, but I also support reasonable reforms into the system to make sure we're getting more out of our system. That just seems like the American way. We're maximizing the benefit and trying to benefit students and staff. But there are some challenges. I think I would encourage you to maybe have a work session on it. Maybe with your board here, talk about some ideas, look at what OSPI is doing for some of their grants, see what some other school districts are adopting, maybe even consider partnering with Eastmont to explore that possibility, because I don't know how you could, well, I know a lot of people like how the two school calendars are so aligned because you have staff one side that work in the other and vice versa, and kids get choiced. And so maybe partnering with Eastmont to explore something would be a good cross-cooperative partnership. So I've sponsored a bill like that. I've also sponsored a bill. It's all voluntary and incentive-based. I don't like the mandates. The legislature's in this carrots and sticks business, and I prefer the carrots. But one of the pieces of legislation I sponsored got pretty far, all the way to the House and all this stuff last year, was to incentivize school districts to voluntarily consolidate, especially some of the smaller districts. You saw how average per pupil is like $14,000 a year. Some school districts, I think like Palisades is like $25,000 per year per student, $22,000 for Arando, something like that. So I have this theme of like trying to push the conversation, encourage school districts to think differently. And in this case, I think it would be worth our effort. I know everybody gets so busy with all these things. You don't really have time to like think about these big things, but I think you do. I think that's school district leadership. And someday I want to put forth the challenge to you, Martin. I think we need to start thinking about a third high school in this community. Now, I know that's big time, but I'm not talking, I don't know, like Wenatchee needs a second high school. Yeah, it was overcrowded when Bill and I were there. I think Eastmont, even though the bond that I was a part of at Eastmont, we renovated Eastmont High School, but I know they need more. So I don't know if the communities are able to support a second high school at Eastmont or a second high school for Wenatchee. But I do think the Wenatchee Valley could support a third high school. So is there a way for Wenatchee and Eastmont to partner together and try to be cooperative and collaborative and build something very needed for the greater communities we serve? I think it makes sense. So maybe not obviously consolidating Wenatchee and Eastmont, of course, but maybe partnering in an interlocal agreement to build a third high school for this valley. I think that'd be pretty cool. I'm laying it down, aren't I?
Yeah, you're fine. You know what? I think I said, we thank you for asking questions. And I think that's a great purpose. That's if we need open-mindedness, look at things, and I really appreciate it.
Mhm.
And actually, we've run out the clock and each of us has managed to bring up a topic, which is great. And you gave a great presentation, which we appreciate. The last thing is to say, you gave us an invitation to learn more and visit you later. We should take it up. And so at that point, thank you very much indeed. And I will close out the special meeting and then we'll move on to our regular meeting. So I really appreciate you coming to us despite this slippery road.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me, and all the best to Wenatchee School District in the months and years ahead. So thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Okay, let me get my other set of papers out. I need 30 seconds, yes. Get the actual. Yeah, did I puzzle it up? Do with it. Nailed it. Okay. Okay, it's actually 6:03 and we open our regular school district board meeting on Tuesday, November the 22nd. And I ask everybody, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I welcome everyone to this board meeting and thank you for joining us, whether it's in person, online, or if you're using the recording later to keep yourself informed. And we're always grateful for your civic effort and interest. Ofrezco una bienvenida a esta reunión de la mesa directiva del Distrito Escolar. Gracias por su asistencia, si sea en persona, online o usando el video más tarde para mantenerse informado. Agradecemos su esfuerzo cívico. The meeting, as always, is conducted in English, and I do advertise we have translation services if they are ever requested, so that citizen comment may be spoken in Spanish and repeated in English. Si alguien quiere hacer su comentario de ciudadano o recibir explicaciones en español, por favor indique su necesidad. Tenemos disponible un servicio de traducción. The first item on the agenda is the consent agenda, but before I get there, are there any requests to modify the agenda? No, okay. The consent agenda consists of the minutes of the special meeting on the 1st of November and the regular meeting on the 8th of November, vouchers and payroll, the personnel report, the surplus report, contracts, field trips, the approval form package 217 for highly capable programs, the report on school improvement plans for the schools, and the enrollment and financial report. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Thank you, Laura.
A second.
Thank you, Julie. Is there any discussion?
I would like to recuse myself from the motion.
Okay. You are recused. All right, in that case, other than Maria, those, would we please express our vote by saying aye if we approve? Aye.
Aye.
That's all four in favor of the consent agenda. The next item is citizens' comments. This is the time for the board to welcome and listen to public comment. Comments do need to be scheduled beforehand. We have a 3-minute time limit. I'll warn speakers when their time is about to expire, as it isn't easy to watch the clock. And I didn't check, do we have citizen comment? Okay, we do not. At that point, then we move to special presentations, and the first one is the fiscal year financial review. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce our new Director of Business and Finance, Sean Fitzgerald, and this is his first presentation to the board. I'm excited. I am a numbers guy, and I will say that that means I often ask a lot of questions about the numbers, and Sean has been excellent and risen to all those occasions, and I'm excited for his presentation tonight. So welcome, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Thank you.
Yes, now we are. Thank you. There we go. Perfect. All right. Thank you. President Barron, members of the board, Superintendent Eagle, thank you for having me tonight. It is great to be here to present our 2021-22 year-end report. To start off, just an overview of the district fund structure. Our school district is a governmental agency and as such is subject to our governmental accounting. And as such, all governmental accounting systems are subject to the fund basis of accounting. Here, the district has 5 funds: our general fund, ASB, debt service, capital projects, and transportation vehicle. All of these funds are separate accounting entities that are self-balancing accounts that are designed to achieve specific objectives for the school district. As I walk you through tonight, I'll start with the smallest fund, our transportation vehicle, and gradually work us towards our largest fund, the general fund. Slight technical difficulties. Oh, there we go. All right. Begin with our transportation vehicle fund. It's provided the purpose is to provide for the purchase and major repair of pupil transportation equipment. The fund is a capital projects fund due to the cost of the equipment it acquires and the long-term use of the asset. Revenues and other financing sources are generated from the state reimbursement on our bus depreciation. And additionally, the district may transfer money from the general fund into this fund. Expenditures are recorded when buses are delivered to the district and not when we place the order. So here we have a 5-year trend beginning in 2018-19. And I've kind of given this 5-year trend as a good overview because the board can see kind of a pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and kind of are in our recovery phase and seeing how this fund has fared. As we can see, if we focus on 2021-22, we have received revenues, but we didn't receive any expenditures. And a lot of this was due to supply chain issues. We had placed orders for buses during the 2021-22 school year. And since we don't record expenditures until they're delivered, none were delivered during the year. So although we did receive reimbursements through the state depreciation, we did not record any expenditures because the buses have not arrived yet. As of today, we are due to receive 3 buses in the spring. We're estimating them to be in April, and then another 2 additional buses to arrive in September of the 2023. So we'd expect when we're coming at our next year's year-end report, 3 bus activities, and then the additional 2 buses in September would not arrive until our 23-24 school year. Here's the same data, but broken down by numbers. Again, reflecting that we did have our activity during the pre-pandemic and during the pandemic eras, but again, no expenditures reported during this last school year. And again, just an overview of what we just discussed and the trends of the data. As we see in 2018 and 1920, we had kind of revenue balances due to transfers in our Department of Ecology grants. But going forward, as the years have progressed, we do not have the ecology grant, and our sole focus of revenue is the state depreciation reimbursement. Is there any questions on the transportation vehicle fund before moving on? No.
A few of us attended the WASTA the school directors conference this weekend, and we engaged in conversation about grants for electrical buses. Is this something we have ventured in to get funding to just maybe not all electric school buses, but just different kinds of funding for transportation?
So the Department of Ecology grants were designed specifically for the purpose of acquiring electronic buses. Those grants have expired, but it is something that we can definitely look into to see the availability of what those are in those grants.
Yeah. We were talking to Walla Walla school director, and I mean, they were talking about their bus and just how they were able to acquire it through grant funds.
Great.
Yeah. I might actually like to add something to that. About a year ago, I asked about that, and I think got a feed because buses are a long-term investment, and the answer was not right now. As I understand it, there will be more tranches of subsidies for electric buses, and as Maria mentions, we got a good information from Walla Walla on how they wrote their grants. So I think that's something that definitely should be on the district's plate as it looks into its future annual bus budgets.
Certainly. Any other questions? All right. Moving on, our capital projects fund. And again, the purpose of this fund is to account for financial resources used for the acquisition or construction of major capital facilities. We've used this for the acquisition of land or existing facilities, construction of buildings. It can also be used for improvements to buildings or grounds or remodeling. Revenues and other financing sources generally proceed from the sale of bonds, state matching revenues, and special levies. Again, here we have a 5-year overview of what has occurred in the Capital Projects Fund. As you can see in the mid part there, our 2021-22 budgeted revenues and expenditures compared to actuals, there's quite a variance. And that is due in a large part because we anticipated the construction of the baseball field proceeding in 21-22. However, that has not gone forward. And so right now it's kind of a reflection of what activity has occurred and said during this year. Again, here we have a breakdown by the numbers. The 21-22, both budget and actuals are in green. We can see a substantial amount in the local non-tax 4.5 million that was kind of set aside in anticipation for finance of the baseball fields. But as we can see, that did not occur. The activity that did occur in this capital projects fund, we have state matching funds of nearly $400,000. These were revenue proceeds from our last bond in relation to Sunny Slope Elementary and Washington. And our largest expenditure sources for 21-22 were the Sunny Slope portables, school security upgrades, which were primarily at Sunny Slope, network infrastructure upgrades, and the Wenatchee High School HVAC replacement. Are there any other questions before moving on? Right. Our debt service fund. Again, the purpose of the debt service fund to account for the accumulation of resources and the payment of general long-term debt, principal, and interest. Again, here we have a 5-year trend of our revenues and expenditures for the debt service fund. As you can see, there's kind of continuous growth over the last couple of years. Our debt service fund is made up of 2 bonds, our 2010 and our 2014 bonds. At the end of 21-22, we fully paid off our 2010 bond, so we only have our 2014 bond outstanding, which is due to expire in 2033. Again, here is the breakdown of that chart by its numbers. Are there any questions on the debt service fund?
I do have one actually, and I think you gave me part of the answer. Is because it looked like we're building up a slight surplus over time. But I think I understood the reply to be that if at the end, say 2033, we have still got funds in the debt, money in the debt fund, and we've repaid that bond completely, it can then be applied to a future bond, but no other purpose.
That is correct.
Okay.
And could you remind us why it appears that we're making a extraordinarily large principal payment in the 2022-23 budget on the 2014 bond?
Certainly. So how the debt schedule was structured, starting in 2014, the only payments on how it was structured was interest payments only. And then it gradually in 2018, we started just paying a little small principal amount, but still large interest. And now beginning in 22-23, based on the debt schedule, we're both paying the entire, regular principal amounts along with large interests. So this is how, and as the debt schedule shows across to 2033, this will continually increase. It won't double, but it will gradually increase over time until 2033.
Is it common to do that when bonds overlap? So if we were to get another bond, would we follow that same sort of a schedule, paying, mostly interest in the beginning, and then, it's tenfold increase or more in the payment from one year to the next, it appears.
I think it would depend on what the bond is for and how it is structured and how we would work with our attorneys to accomplish what kind of bond we're looking for, how much, and then we can work with them on how that would play out over, 15, 20 years.
And I'm guessing that you would base the principal and interest schedule very much on the projected income from property taxes.
Yes.
So that would create presumably normally a gradually increasing trend.
Yes.
And if you stop paying principal on your older bond, then you would be able to increase the principal on your newer one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right. ASB. The purpose of the ASB is a special revenue fund to account for the proceeds of revenue sources that are legally restricted to expenditures for specific purposes. In this case, those specific purposes are related to activities or events which are cultural, social, recreational, or athletic in nature, and also involve optional non-credit extracurricular events. The fund is financed from establishing and collecting fees, fines, and donations from students and the public. Here we have our 5-year trend of the ASB revenues and expenditures. As we can see here, we see a considerable drop off beginning in 2019-2020 school year, which is due to the COVID lockdown in March of 2020. And we see an additional decrease in 2020 and 21 during when the schools were locked down and we had very limited ASB activity. The variance, when we come back to 21, 22, we're starting to see a return to pre-pandemic levels. Although the variance between our budget and our actuals, I think is large part in anticipating kind of a snapback to a kind of a 2018-19 activity level with the students being back in the school and there are no limited to none COVID restrictions. However, we do see a return that is comparable to the 2019-20 school year. Again, here's our breakdown by the numbers. Overall, again, ASB is returning to pre-COVID lockdown levels. We're seeing revenues and expenditures increase in all categories from the prior school year. Our 2021-22 revenues nearly matched 19-20 alongside, and our expenditures exceeded. The last part is our HB 1660 impact, which relates to the waiver of fines and fees for students of low income or have the applicable college-bound scholarship. Right now, I would say analyzing the impact of this, there's just not enough information. I think we're going to have a better understanding of where we're at and how HB 1660 is impacting the ASB during this school year. And I say that in large part just because we're returning to a school year without COVID restrictions. And so we can see kind of activity without any of those external restrictions in place. Also, 1660 has been in place for, a year or two. So I think everyone's kind of familiar with how it's working and how people can get signed up. And so the full school year, we'll definitely see how it's going to play out and begin analyzing the trends of it. Any questions on ASB?
I have a request rather than a question.
Mhm.
It's related to House Bill 1660. And so you're right, we have an unstable history that we can't draw much information from. I
Mhm.
believe you actually worked on the impact of HB 1660 and you have some experience with that. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I'm glad you got that knowledge. So this is where I was heading with my request, is even though it's a part year, I think it's really crucial that we increase participation in all extracurricular activities,
Mhm.
because this, just to confirm, the ASB budget is funded by non-taxpayer revenue
Mhm.
supporting extracurricular and student activities. So it's saying that it's not, but we are interested in supporting those activities, having a balanced budget, and making sure to the greatest extent possible that we use the fee waiver to really increase and improve our participation. To the extent that you and your team can work on that when you do the 22-23 budget and
Mhm.
gain insights, that'd be great.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Certainly. Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions before moving on? All right. Moving on to the general fund. So the general fund is our largest fund and is used to account for all financial resources, except those required to be accounted for in another fund. The general fund is financed from local, county, state, and federal sources, and these revenues are generally used for financing the current, ordinary, normal, and recurring operations of the school district. So here's a breakdown of our 2021 general fund revenues. We can see it broken out between local taxes, local, state, and federal sources. As you can see, our largest source of revenue is coming from state apportionment, which is listed under state general purpose. Our second largest source of revenue would be federal special purpose, which are our federal grants, specifically ESSER. Here is a breakdown of how the revenues are broken out. Again, we can see just from this diagram that our apportionment from state general purpose revenue funding accounts for almost 55% or over half of our revenues. Oops. Here again is our trend of our revenue and financing sources over a 5-year trend. Again, 21-22 budget and actuals are highlighted in green, and going through the variances of what we budgeted for and what we actually received. You can see our biggest variance was in our federal special purpose. Again, we budgeted for 36 million, but it came out to about 23 million. So we had a difference of roughly $13 million. This variance is due in large part because we anticipated receiving about $25 million in COVID stimulus money, which was budgeted in the 21-22 budget, but we did not receive $25 million. So it was about half of that. So that is accounting for the biggest variance in our revenue projections. Again, and then that is our largest variance. Again, our second actual for local non-tax actual revenue is less than budget due to E-rate reimbursements, food services sales, and gifts and donations. Again, I believe there was an anticipation for kind of a snapback, kind of a pre-COVID revenue sources that didn't actually come to pass. And then on our state general purpose, we had higher than anticipated apportionment revenue, due in large part that our actual enrollment was over 100 FTE higher than our budgeted. And again, here's a breakdown of just the terminology and what makes up our revenue sources. Before moving on to expenditures, does anyone have any questions on revenues? Okay. Again, here we have our breakdown of our expenditures by program and our 5-year trend. Again, 21-22 activities in green. And again, we can see our biggest variances are in the federal stimulus, COVID-19 funds, our compensatory programs, and regular instruction. A little ahead of myself, but again, the breakdown is again an anticipated to focus on our federal stimulus money. We have a $12 million variance. This is due in large part, again, to the anticipated revenue we expected to receive. So since we didn't have a revenue source, we didn't spend any of the expenditures. So that is why it accounts for the largest difference there. Compensatory programs, the variance there is due in large part just because, again, programs that were kind of expected to return maybe to previous COVID level activities did not occur. And then regular instruction was down. Again, a large part due just because we had alternative funding sources for regular instruction. So regular instruction is normally going to be funded out of our basic education. We're still using our ESSER funds to cover regular instruction. Again, here is just a breakdown of how expenditures are broken out. Again, we can see regular instruction is 40%. And again, federal stimulus, although halfway down, is still accounting for almost 10% of our total expenditures in the 21-22 year. Again, here we have a breakdown of our expenditures by object code, so we can see how it is our expenditures are being spent between salaries, benefits, and supplies, materials, purchase services. Again, our largest variance is the purchase services. So we see $23 million variance between budget and actual. Again, this was where anticipated COVID funds were budgeted. They were budgeted in the purchase services. And since those did not occur, that's why we're seeing this huge variance. For salaries and benefits, we spent almost 102 million, or 82% of district expenditures, which is comparable to the statewide average of 85%. Most school districts around kind of have this kind of expenditure activity. Materials and supplies, 10.5 million, or 9% of district expenditures was spent on supplies. Most of this was technology and food service related. Lastly, we have our purchase services and contracts. It's 10.3 million, or 8%. Most of this was COVID-related enrollment stabilization and ESSER funds, which of that 10.3 million was 9 million related to COVID stimulus funding. Is there any questions on expenditures before we move on? No. Last is our fund balance. So one of the last things we want to do is where we ended up at the end of 21-22 and how that compares to the beginning of 22-23. So our 21-22 ending fund balance will always be our 22-23 beginning fund balance. When we approved the budget in August, our anticipated beginning fund balance was 22.2 million. Of that, the general fund was 16,250,000. Now that we have actual numbers, our new beginning fund balance is actually 19.1 million. So we're coming in higher by $2.8 million. So that means we have an additional $2.8 million in our fund balance that we can work with that we did not expect when we did the budget. So what does that mean? So these are unrestricted funds. They're not subject to, although we came in higher than anticipated because we used additional ESSER funds during 21-22, but the additional funding that in our fund balance is unrestricted. So they're not related to ESSER or subject to that. So this kind of gives the district flexibility and looking forward for this school year and the next school year. And keeping in mind that there's flexibility in working around, there's concern about budget reductions and how the school district is going to approach that. So this gives us an extra cushion that we didn't anticipate, and gives us consideration for what we want to do for this year or for multiple years on how we want to use this. So this extra money could absorb extra costs for this year that we maybe didn't anticipate being able to do so, and gives us different options when approaching budget reductions. Is there any other questions?
I actually was saving it up, some things. I think we've gone through 2 or 3 years where everything has been pretty much obscured by ESSA funds and things like that.
Mhm.
And as we come out of it, it's a little difficult to see where we're getting to. So I've got a couple of comments and a couple of requests. I think some of the ESSA funds slopped over from 21-22 to 22-23 simply because of delayed delivery of materials and supplies. Am I correct?
You're correct.
Yeah, so some of it's in that, and that needs to be sorted out. And I do want to highlight the fact that the opening fund balance for this fiscal year, as you say, is 2.8 million better. And then as we go ahead, stepping backwards, I wanted to thank you for the really clear way in which you distinguish the different funds and their different purposes. And actually, I kind of like the way of you doing the small ones first, to get them out of the way so people then can clearly see what's left in the general fund, which is the big gorilla that we mostly want to watch.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you and the superintendent and the district are getting ready to work diligently on the 22-23 budget. And I look forward to discovering what you've learned from the variances and the available funds. And I think this presentation is a very promising start.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for this presentation. It's probably the clearest, easiest to read financial presentation I've ever seen in any of the agencies I worked with. So this is fantastic. I love seeing it in various formats for the visual, for the, the broken out versions. And thank you. It's very nice.
Thank you.
Do you have anything else to add, or was that your balances was your ending?
The fund balance, that was my finale.
That was
So-
That's right. It's 10:15 on the 4th of July and it looks beautiful over the river. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Fine. The next item is me, and I'm looking to where I shuffled my report. What did I do with that? I said that at every regular meeting, we would do a kind of a timeline status report on where we are with the superintendent search. And I am embarrassed. I have it here, and it's one page. Oh, here we are. Nope, that's the one. Here we go. Sorry about that. So the update I give will be fairly general and won't capture all of the information being communicated. Messages and information going out to all parts of the school district community, and there are daily additions, email blasts, remind messages, postings to social media sites, and a press release. So there's a lot of information out there for everyone to track. I'm going to go over what's on the superintendent search website page, because that hits the factual highlights. You can reach that by going to the board drop-down menu on the district website and opening what's called superintendent search, where you will now see a stakeholder input public forums tab. That publicizes the English language forum in the high school commons on Monday, November the 28th from 6:30 to 7:30. Y publica el foro en español en el mismo lugar el jueves 1 de diciembre de 6:30 a 7:30. So there's English and Spanish in the same way, in the same places on those two dates, November the 28th and December the 1st. Under stakeholder input surveys, you'll find links to the English and Spanish versions of the survey and survey questions. The survey is open until midnight on December the 11th. Under district staff input for 2 other large groups Zoom meetings, you will find Zoom meeting links for certificated staff on 2 days, both at 4 p.m., November the 29th and December the 5th. And for certificated staff, also 2 days, 4 p.m. on November the 30th and December the 8th. Then there are 2 days of in-person small meetings for representatives of stakeholder groups, and those will take place during the day on November the 28th and December the 1st. The consultants will be here for those 2 days. That will be for student groups, parent, family, and booster organizations, employee organizations, and community organizations, and elected officials. Invitations are being sent out, and these meetings will be a mix, some in English and some in Spanish. Also, to remind all of us, there's a pop-up alert that's going to come up on the website reminding us of the survey and forums. And I've been asked to say that if you aren't able to take a part in a meeting, please do the survey, and we'll collect that information. As far as the actual search timeline, that has not changed since the last update 2 weeks ago. Also on the superintendent search page, if you want to poke around, there's a view the position brochure, which is a nice package which advertises the position and also publicizes and promotes in a short format the Wenatchee School District's attractive employment attributes. And that promoting the district is an important part of the superintendent search. Collaborative one between the district and communications director Diana Hagland and McPherson and Jacobson. There's also an apply for the position link. If you have friends who are qualified to be superintendents, that links to McPherson and Jacobson's job and application posting. In terms of posting and advertising, the job description and application are now posted and advertised at Consultant McPherson and Jacobson's site and on 7 different industry and professional association websites. Some of them are national, some of them are Washington State, and some of them are specifically Latino. The only other thing I've got to add is that McPherson and Jacobson's lead consultant, Dr. Stephen Lauder, attended last week's State WASDA conference in Spokane, and they had a table there, and he told me that he'd been able to speak with a number of interested potential candidates during that meeting, so that was very constructive. So that's the update that I have, but I will, if anybody has questions or wants to get into additional information, please ask me. Okay, well, we'll try and keep that up and keep everybody informed. Thank you very much. And at that point, I'm doing this again, aren't I?
I have one quick question.
Yeah.
Do we have kind of an idea of how we're collecting the stakeholders, the forum information, and how that's going to be the raw data that you've spoken about, how that will be collected and then used by us or used after those 2 forums?
Yes, well, we have promises and undertakings, and I don't see Diana. Kim, we have an undertaking that all of the information will be visible to all board members. It may be hundreds and hundreds of pages. There will also be summaries. Is that correct, Kim? Is that what you understand too?
Yes, and I also, the consultant also said he would not be distributing paper surveys. So everything will be electronic. I suppose, if there's an accommodation needed, we could do that, but the online survey is available both in English and Spanish.
How is the forum information going to be collected? Do you know?
Well, he's taking notes. So the consultants will summarize their notes from the forums. And also, Martin, I just wanted to mention, I did get an email late this afternoon from Dr. Lauder, and they have sent out over 1,600 packets to individuals advertising the position. So they're promoting it very broadly.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Kim. And do you have anything else? Because I didn't actually ask you directly. Okay.
No, just that last bit of information.
Okay. No, thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much. And Bill, it is now your superintendent report time.
All right, thank you. I have some great things to share with you all in regards to our connections with the community and some things that have been going on in the district recently. I would like to thank Eastmont School District. They hosted a joint listen and learn evening with Latino parents. Wenatchee and Eastmont partnered on that. We hosted November 15th, and it was regarding gangs. We had roughly 25 families that were present for that event that was hosted at Perico's, a restaurant. And it was a wonderful opportunity for both of our districts to hear authentic conversations and leverage the voice of our families. A big thank you to Dr. Maria Morales from Central Washington University, Myra Navarro, and our very own Mr. Alfonso Lopez, who were all there and helped facilitate those conversations. It was a wonderful learning time. As you may have heard, we also had at Wenatchee High School a first responder career fair last Thursday to connect students with professionals in the first responder fields. We had exhibits set up in the hallway and in the parking lot at the high school. There were a lot of emergency vehicles. We had emergency room staff, firefighters, EMTs, and law enforcement, including our very own school resource officers, Steele and Officer Fuller were there as representatives of the Wenatchee PD. So students were able to attend that career fair during the school day and also during the lunch period. The Wenatchee River Institute has partnered with our Science Resource Center to bring their traveling planetarium to our elementary schools at no cost last week. And that activity was an extension of our first grade Patterns in the Sky Science Unit and also our fifth grade Spaceship Earth Science Unit. So we're happy to have the Wenatchee River Institute bring that for our students. And I had an opportunity to participate in Westside High School's Wellness Day, which was the first of 3 that they will host this year. And local agencies and health coaches connected with students to share information about services that are available to them. And in addition, Numerica Credit Union was there and provided some financial literacy talks that I was able to attend. So great things going on with the community. Also wanted to mention to the board that we're wrapping up our winter sports season, and I want to say thank you to all the athletes for their hard work in the fall season. Our girls volleyball team participated in the state tournament. The girls went 1-2 at the state tournament. They beat Kennedy Catholic in 3 sets in their first round, ended up losing to Mount Rainier and to Olympia, but they played hard and were very competitive all tournament long and represented Wenatchee well. And as we kick off the start of our winter athletic season, the girls bowling team started Big 9 play last week and swept Sunnyside 4-0. On Thursday, they traveled to Yakima, which was a non-league match there versus Sela, and they swept Sela 4-0. And the highlight of that match was a score of 202 bowled by one of our freshman bowlers, Sophie Johnson. So congratulations to the bowlers. In winter athletics, we also have basketball, wrestling, and boys swimming going on during the winter months. And I encourage the board and the community to come out and support the Panthers. Believe it or not, the process has also begun for the selection of this year's Apple Blossom Royal Court. And I would like to congratulate all the senior girls from both Wenatchee High School and Westside who are pursuing that opportunity to serve this year. We look forward to learning more about those girls as we move the selection process forward. And I would like to close my report today with a request. We were able to hear from Sean about the health of our budget and where we're at moving forward. And we know, based on some information that I shared earlier in August as I stepped into this position, that we have some work to do to get our enrollment back in line with our revenues sources back in line with our enrollment. And so my recommendation as secretary to the board is that the board consider forming a subcommittee to assist with budget preparations for 23-24 year. That would allow me to have some more direct communication and involvement with board members during the budgeting process as Sean and the team and I work with district staff to build the budget for next year and moving forward in our projections. So if the board would entertain a subcommittee of that nature at some time in the future, I think it would be appreciated by myself and the cabinet team.
Okay, thanks, Bill. I have a comment on that, but before I speak, I'd ask other board members if they comment on any immediate reaction to Bill's request.
It makes sense to have one. Most agencies, I think, do typically. And I think given some of the shortfalls we're trying to overcome, even though we finished with a very good positive there for the fund balance, it sounds like we're still trying to overcome a massive hole. So, and looking for funding for maybe additional building improvements outside of capital or outside of a bond potentially. So I think it makes sense to do it. I'm familiar with government budgets and would happily volunteer if we got around to it, but that's down the road.
What else? I would say the same thing as Julie. I'm used to having budget subcommittees or committees on boards, and I think it's useful and it accelerates and makes the process sharper. So I think this is great. In our own policies, the president has the authority to set up a committee. So having just raised it now, as Bill said, let's say we're going to do it and figure out how to form a committee and how to do it and work with the finance department and the superintendent as they work through their budget process, and obviously report back to the board.
Is this a board subcommittee?
Yeah, could be two people.
Sorry, in my head, I was thinking something a little bit broader.
We have district committees that are also doing work around this, but I think that interaction with the board is important as we move forward, and not only this year, but also looking at the 4-year projections.
Yeah, I think this is a little narrower focus than, say, you would have a capital committee working on bonds. And we did kick around the idea of having kind of a wise person advisory committee, sort of people, financial experience, people putting input into the school district. And that isn't happening right now. It was just a discussion thought. But this would be a narrow focus on assisting the district get cleanly and clearly to specific budget recommendations for the board. No, thanks, Bill. I think that's.
I concur that with Julie, and I think it's a really good idea to do this. And I'm going to defer to other board members to participate. I think there have been some opportunities for me to participate in different committees, subcommittees so far. And so I want to just say, spread the wealth. And it's a great opportunity for board members who aren't as familiar with school financing to really learn a lot with a hands-on task.
At that point, I'll go right this time. Community board communications.
Good.
So this is in order. So I attended virtually the 5th grade AIDS puberty curriculum parent night on November 15th. Great presentation by a couple of the teachers at Lewis and Clark. I hear attendance was record high. And just a reminder that the recording as well as the presentation is posted on the district website, and instruction material from all the grades that receive sexual health education is also posted on the website in case parents, community members are curious what's instruction is being delivered to our students. And then on this past Saturday, I attended the SpongeBob musical, which was fabulous. It was a really good show. Blown away. We have a lot of talent in our district. Our parent volunteers were awesome. And then also our district staff. Just very enjoyable show. And kudos to everyone that participated and volunteered their time for that. And then again, 3 of us attended the WASTA conference, which was really, really instrumental in our professional development, in my opinion. I won't go into the details of it, but A lot of networking, which was, I think, highlights of my experience there, being in person for the first time.
I don't have much, but kind of circling back, and I guess it relates to feedback I've had from families and my own experiences. I would welcome a workshop on talking about calendar systems. I'm very much in support of a new, different, makes more sense, shorter summer break calendar system, because, and that seems to be feedback I hear a lot from parents, is this is just hard to manage. A long break in the summer where resources tend to evaporate. You're getting on a new schedule just to jump back into another schedule in the fall. So I welcome an opportunity to discuss a longer school year calendar.
No, thanks, Julie. I think I don't want to go too far down that path. I was surprised in a good way by that somewhat different ways that one district was Cowacheetyton, the Highland District near Yakima, and the other one was in Lewis County and actually there's a K-8 one in Union Gap, and they all gave different ideas, but they went about it a little more creatively than I could appreciate by myself. I think this is a process that takes time to nurture and develop. So if there's enough interest, I'd very much like to partner with the superintendent and, see how you, Bill, feel about it, and gradually reel in all, it's multifaceted. So that's great. No, thank you. For my board comment, I make a bit of a joke about it. I think we ended up at 360 pages to read for today's board meeting, but the school improvement pages were great. And I really appreciated seeing those efforts and the detail and the level went into it, and to see the maturation, I think, of the process from one year to another, like a lot of emphasis on professional development groups, and seeing how people were kind of taking what they learned in the previous year and taking it forward, because the name of the game is about improvement. And so seeing those doing that reading was a pleasure. So that's my board communication. Okay. I think then at that point, I will adjourn the meeting and thank you all for attending.